The following recording is a program of the World War I Historical Association. This special ongoing series commemorates the centennial of the First World War.
This is Dana Lombardy for the World War I Historical Association. On October 2nd and 3rd of 2015, a Collaboration Symposium was held between the WW1HA and the League of World War I Aviation Historians. This series presents the seminars offered at that symposium.
Obviously, you haven't heard me before. All right. Well, I'm going to be speaking to you about how the development of a practical method of allowing machine gun bullets to be fired through the arc of a spinning propeller changed the face of aerial warfare forever. You'll also hear how a certain group of pioneering German airmen helped this nascent technology evolve into such a lethal and effective weapon that the period that followed its debut became known as the Fokker Scourge, or Fokker Scourge, I was corrected. A time when one airplane type, the Fokker, Eindecker, or monoplane, dominated the skies. This in turn caused a chain reaction that led to the birth of fighter aviation as we know it today. The stories of those pioneer German aviators, supplemented by numerous period photographs, will be shared as well. First, however, let me adjust this so I can see what I'm reading. Okay. First, however, let me provide a little background information to help you place this period in context. And here, please bear in mind that I'll be speaking in generalities in the interest of brevity, and that there are always exceptions to what I'm about to summarize. During the beginning months of the war, the airplane was primarily an instrument of reconnaissance. It was used to view enemy troop movements, look for their artillery, or help friendly artillery zero in on their targets. There were sporadic cases of small bombs or darts being dropped on ground troops, but from late 1914 to mid-1915, the primary use of the airplane was reconnaissance. During those early months, whenever enemy aircraft spotted one another on their respective missions, their crews, depending on their individual dispositions, responded to the actions that varied from waving to one another, to giving each other space, retreating, or harassing one another either by close flybys, pistol fire, rifle fire, or even dropping darts or grenades on each other from above. Some of the more enterprising and aggressive crews had machine guns mounted on their planes, and it was here that the French had a distinct advantage for a combination of reasons. Some of their aircraft, like this one here, were pusher types, which means the engine was in the back and pushed the plane forward, leaving a clear field of fire from the nose of the aircraft. They also had lightweight machine guns and powerful engines that could accommodate the added weight and armament. The Germans, on the other hand, primarily used tractor-type aircraft, like this one, with a more restricted forward field of fire. Their machine guns were significantly heavier and could not be carried aloft by the engines that propelled their planes at that time. And by the way, at this time, the pilot sat in the rear cockpit and the observer in the forward one. So you can see even trying to mount a machine gun would have been really awkward. Accordingly, the first air-to-air machine gun, I'm being very specific, machine gun victory, air-to-air machine gun victory, went to a French Voisin crew on 5 October 1914. With this alarming event and others that followed, the Germans scrambled to develop a lighter machine gun and the engine and airframe to carry it aloft. This was finally accomplished in May 1915 when the first of the German C-types, like this one, known as Kampfflugzeug, or combat planes, began making their way to the front. They were specifically designed to carry the new Parabellum MG-14. It weighed only 21 pounds, near the aft cockpit to provide a better field of fire. But just when the Germans thought they had caught up, they were rocked by another French advancement. On 1 April 1915, Roland Garot of Escadrille MS-26 shot down a German two-seater using a Morane-Saulnier single-seat monoplane Scout with a machine gun that, to the Germans' amazement, fired through the arc of its propeller. Garot repeated the act on 8 April, although that one went unconfirmed, on 15 April, and then again on 18 April before ground fire or a clogged fuel line forced him to make an emergency landing behind German lines. His captors eagerly studied his intact aircraft to learn the secret of his seemingly miraculous victories. It turned out that steel wedges had been attached to the rear faces of the plane's propeller blades that deflected the bullets that otherwise would have struck them. The remaining bullets passed through the space between the blades. It was a crude but effective invention that was shown to various manufacturers and inventors for replication or improvement. Before the war, Swiss engineer Franz Schneider had devised a mechanism enabling a machine gun to fire through a revolving propeller that was patented by the German LVG company in 1911. It's believed the German military saw a demonstration of it in 1912, but, ironically, rejected it because they did not envision the airplane as a fighting machine. Synchronization devices were also developed and used by the British and Russian inventors in 1914. So the concept was already known, but it had never really been put to practical use. So this is where Dutch aircraft designer Anthony Fokker came in. Now, Fokker later claimed in his autobiography, Flying Dutchman, that he came up with a better mechanism in just 48 hours. Yeah, this undoubtedly was an exaggeration. That's something that Fokker was never averse to. And it seems far more likely that his company had already done some work on a mechanism that was inspired by the pre-war efforts that I already mentioned to you. At any rate, Fokker did indeed respond with something he called Zentralsteuerung, or centralized control, that worked as follows. A cam wheel was attached to and rotated with the propeller shaft. After the machine gun was loaded and its firing hammer cocked, the pilot could pull a handle that enabled the trigger. That handle lowered a cam follower onto the cam wheel. When the follower was pushed upwards by a bulge in the cam wheel, a rod was pushed back against a spring, enabling the trigger to fire the gun. The bulge in the cam was aligned to engage only when the propeller blades were out of the line of fire. So it's fairly simple. The firing trigger mechanism could only connect when the blades weren't in the way. Now, it so happens that Fokker had also created a line of fast single-seat monoplane Scouts that had already been employed successfully, though in limited numbers, at the front. Fokker mounted his device and one of the recently developed light parabellum machine guns onto this airframe, and within a few weeks was prepared to demonstrate it to military authorities. He did so first on 19 May 1915 at Döberitz outside of Berlin, where his display was so impressive that he was quickly requested to provide several examples of his armed Scout for use in the field. It would be given the official military designation of Fokker E-1, E for Eindecker, or monoplane. A veteran airman was assigned to his system, Lieutenant Otto Parschau of the German Air Service. Otto Edvard Parschau, born on 11 November 1890, was a pre-war flyer who had earned his pilot's license on 4 July 1913. He'd been one of the first to fly one of Fokker's unarmed monoplane Scouts at the front, and had become a major proponent of it. Back on 18 November 1914, he had flown his Scout to Feldflieger Abteilung 13's airfield at Pont-Fabergé, perhaps to show it to a man he had befriended before the war, when both were stationed at Darmstadt. In any event, the man was so impressed with it that he immediately wanted one of his own. His request was granted on 8 December, and he informed his parents. I was in Rethel yesterday and fetched my Fokker, which had arrived in the meantime. A little monoplane with a French rotary engine in front, roughly half the size of a Taube. It's the last modern machine that I hadn't flown yet, so now I can fly all the types we have in Germany. The Fokker was my big Christmas present. I now have two apparatuses, the large biplane for long flights, the little Fokker for artillery flights. The thing's wonderful in the air and is easy to handle. My two children are now peacefully resting together in a tent, the little one somewhat dug in with its tail under the wings of the large one. That pilot's name was Lieutenant Oswald Bulka, who will figure prominently in the story to come. But first, back to Fokker and Parschau. Fokker's next demonstration was on 13 June for Crown Prince Wilhelm at the airfield outside his headquarters at Stenay. Fokker later wrote, quote, "The maneuver of the small fighting plane always created a sensation because I made the most of my experience in displaying its best features." Very modest man, you can tell. So when I went aloft, I performed a few acrobatics, then at 1,500 feet, nosed the plane down, diving at a 45-degree angle, and firing into a little stream bordering the field, about 200 or 300 feet away from the Crown Prince. As soon as the trigger was pressed, the tuck-a-tuck-tuck of the gun started, the bullets sending up a chain of geysers as they hit the stream. 60 or 70 feet from the ground, I pulled up into a steep climb, swung back over their heads, and repeated the dive, shooting as I came in. Landing quickly, I taxied up close to the Crown Prince, shut off the engine, and jumped out with a big smile because I saw from the faces and gestures of the flying officers how much they were impressed. The Crown Prince was, in fact, ecstatic and fully supported the next step, which was to deliver some of the precious E-1 fighters to pilots that could be trusted to use them wisely. This was done on 23 June, when Parschau accompanied Fokker to La Braille airfield outside of Douai and dropped off 5 E-1 fighters there. 3 of those went to nearby outfits where Parschau tutored them in their use, and the remaining 2 stayed in Douai for the use of Lieutenant Oswald Bulka. Oswald Max Bulka, born on 19 May 1891, had displayed both his frustration and his aggressive spirit 1 month earlier, when he had asked his CO to requisition a machine gun from a French 2-seater that had been captured near Douai on 26 May 1915. He had the captured gun mounted on the LVG B-2 he was flying so that he could bring the fight to the enemy while awaiting the new armed C-1 Kampfflugzeug that had been promised. As mentioned earlier, he had also flown an unarmed Fokker Eindecker for several months, so his aggressive spirit, his familiarity with the Eindecker, and his association with Parschau undoubtedly earned him first crack at the new E-1 fighter. Bulka's unit, Feldfliegerabteilung 62, had finally received an armed Kampfflugzeug just 10 days before Fokker and Parschau's visit. So Bulka now alternated between piloting it and the new E-1. Ironically, it was in the LVG C-1 Kampfflugzeug that Bulka achieved his first victory. On 4 July, he and his observer, Lieutenant Hans Helmut von Bullisch, shot down an Escadrille MS-15 Morin Saulnier Type L, killing its crew, Lieutenants Maurice Tétu and Georges de la Rochefoucauld. It was a harbinger of things to come, as one of Bulka's squadron mates, Willy Aschenborn, later recalled. There's Willy. Quote, "In this, the first air combat that he was able to carry through completely, he revealed, to our utter astonishment, a totally undreamt of flying skill. The way in which he came to grips with the opponent, constantly pushing him down from about 2,500 meters to 1,000 meters, flying so close that one feared a collision at any moment, and yet always concerning himself with keeping the opponent in his observer's field of fire. All this was entirely new, and thereby laid the groundwork for each of his later air combats and successes, as well as for all fighter aviation," unquote. 2 days later, 2 days after his victory, Bulka wrote his family, "I'll probably fly the biplane only rarely. I regret that because I must now separate myself from von Bullisch. On the other hand, I'm pleased because I hold to the following. The strong man is most powerful alone. I've attained my ideal with the single-seater. Now one can be pilot, observer, and fighter all at the same time," unquote. Bulka realized that this new aircraft type had a tremendous advantage. He would no longer have to maneuver his airplane to get his observer into a position to fire his gun for what was often a deflection shot, that is, at an angle from the target where you must estimate how far you need to lead or fire ahead of your moving target so that some of your bullets in the target, in fact, collide. Now the pilot could aim the entire airplane, now the pilot could aim the entire airplane himself like he would a gun. And if he could get directly behind his target, little or no deflection shooting would be necessary, and every bullet could count. Bulka's jury-rigged LBG-B2 and then his LBG-C1 Kampfflugzeug were both handed down for use to another FFA-62 pilot. His name was Max Immelmann. Max Immelmann, born 21 September 1890, had joined FFA-62 as an officer candidate back in late April 1915. Prior to that, he had served only 13 days with another frontline unit before being sent back to Germany with this note in his file: completely unsuitable as an airplane pilot at the front. Squadron mate Billy Aschenborg related that this was, quote, because of too many crash landings, unquote. Bulka's biographer, someone called Professor Johannes Werner, reported, quote, although accepted for the air service at the beginning of the war, Immelmann did not pass his third set of tests until March 26, 1915, after which he served in the Champagne, where he won the reputation of being a specialist in the art of crashing his machine on land. Unquote. But Immelmann was about to garner a very different reputation. Sorry. Immelmann was also fascinated with the Fokker E1, and he had Bulka tutor him in it on 30 and 31 July. The next day, August 1st, Bulka went up in pursuit of several aircraft that had been bombing the airfield, their airfield, that is. A short time later, Immelmann decided to take up Bulka's spare Fokker E1, remember there were two that were dropped off, to come to his aid. Now here's a portion of what Immelmann said happened next. This is a quote again. Suddenly, I saw Bulka go down steeply. As I learned later, he had had a serious gun jam and couldn't shoot anymore. I was just halfway between Douai and Arras when I saw a third airplane far ahead of me. I couldn't see whether it was an enemy or one of us. I flew toward him. Then I saw that he dropped bombs over Vitry. Now it was clear, an enemy. I climbed slightly and flew toward him. Another two started to come after me, so I had to act quickly. I dove at him like a hawk and fired my machine gun. For a moment, I thought I'd fly into him. I'd fired around about 60 rounds when my gun jammed. That was pretty unpleasant because I needed both hands to clear it and had to fly completely hands-free without being able to use the control stick. This was all new and strange to me, as it was to everybody else. But I succeeded. The same thing happened to me twice more during the course of the fight. Meanwhile, the enemy was going back toward Arras. I quickly set myself alongside him and cut off his way back by forcing him to make a left turn, that is, to head toward Douai. During my firing pauses, I heard the rattling of the machine guns of the enemy above me, but only faintly. I constantly tried to stay as directly above my quarry as possible because no biplane could shoot straight up. After about 450 to 500 rounds, the fight having lasted about 8 to 10 minutes, the enemy went into a steep, controlled dive. I went after him. I couldn't shoot anymore because the machine gun had broken down. When I saw that he had landed, I immediately landed next to him, got out, and walked toward him. No one was in the vicinity, and I didn't have a weapon. Would the crew resist? It was an unpleasant moment. From far away, I shouted, "Prisonnier!" But then I saw that only one person sat inside. He had raised his right hand as a sign that he would not resist. I went up to him, I shook hands and said, "Bonjour, monsieur." He answered in English. I said, "Ah, you're an Englishman." He said, "Yes." I replied, "You're my prisoner." He responded, "My arm is broken. You shot very well." Just then I saw that he was seriously wounded in the left arm. I helped him get out, placed him on the grass, pulled off his gloves and cut open the sleeves of his leather jacket, uniform, and shirt. His forearm had been shot through. Then I finally had time to look at the machine. I had shot well. 2 shots in the propeller, none in the motor. 3 shots in the gas tank, 5 in the fuselage, 6 in the wings, and all the instruments, such as the altimeter, anemometer, and RPM indicator, were destroyed. Quite a few wires that brace the machine, some cables that operate the control surfaces, the bomb dropping device, the left wheel, almost everything was shot to pieces. There were about 40 hits in the apparatus, unquote. And so it was that Immelmann, who'd only been tutored on this plane for 3 days, not Bulke, became the first German pilot at this sector of the front, I'll explain that in a minute, to have shot down an enemy plane with the new Eindecker fighter. But his was not the first Eindecker victory. That honor belonged to Lieutenant Kurt Finkens. Finkens, who, by the way, is wearing glasses, as you see, born 1 August 1894, was acquainted with Anthony Fokker. So when he decided to become a pilot, he requested that he be trained at Fokker's factory in Schwerin-Gürtis. He subsequently flew most of the Fokker's unarmed monoplane scout types there, cementing his relationship with their developer. After the news of Roland Garros spread, Winkens immediately saw the potential of the new Fokker Eindecker as a fighter plane. He wrote a friend, quote, not exactly the war type that you normally think of. In the field, I'd like to fly the smallest and fastest Fokker type with the Garot installation, which enables a built-in machine gun to fire through the propeller. You have to aim the whole of the machine, which must be easy with the enormous sensitivity of the machine. Then I, as a single-seater, would take on every biplane, which I can clearly outclimb and attack from above and behind. Finkens, who had been sent to the southeastern portion of the Western Front, got his wish in June when Fokker provided him with an E-1 employing his interrupter mechanism. After a French fighter with Garot's apparatus was reported near Sarrebourg-Bulle, Finkens was sent there to counter the threat. On 2 July, Finkens reported, quote, I had flown to the front a couple of times without seeing an opponent until yesterday evening when the big moment came. Suddenly, I noticed a monoplane in front of me, about 35 meters higher. At the same moment, he dived on me, firing his machine gun fiercely and decently. He missed wildly, though, since I dived once in an opposite direction under him. After 4 attacks, I reached his altitude in a large turn, and now my machine gun did some talking as well. I attacked at such a close distance that we looked each other in the face. After my 3rd attack, he did the most stupid thing that he could do. He fled. I turned the crate on the spot and had him immediately, excuse me, beautifully in my sight. Rapid fire for about 4 seconds and down went his nose. I could follow him until 500 meters, then, unfortunately, I was fired upon too hotly from the ground, the fight being far over the French lines. Hopefully, I'll soon meet a biplane, unquote. Now, French documents recorded that on 1 July, a Marin L. Parasol from Escadrille MS-48 was forced to land east of Lunéville after engaging a Fokker around 6 p.m., and that both occupants were wounded. Finkens was not credited with an official victory, however, most likely because the plane landed behind its own lines. Still, this action is now recognized as the first time the Fokker Eindecker was used to shoot down an enemy plane. During the 7 or so months that followed, the Entente powers were unable to offer much to effectively counter the Germans' new deadly weapon. Fokker added to their woes by continually upgrading his product. The E-1, powered by an 80 horsepower engine, was quickly superseded by the 100 horsepower E-2. The E-3 improved performance by increasing wingspan and area. Then came the E-4, which not only sported a 160 horsepower engine, but 2 synchronized machine guns as well. Thus, the Eindecker evolved and was provided in ever-increasing numbers, or as the Eindecker evolved was provided in ever-increasing numbers, the successes of the men who flew them proliferated as well. After Immelmann's victory on 1 August 1915, Bulke achieved his first Eindecker win on 19 August. After that, the two continued to add to their tallies, first one, then the other. And their exploits were not only reported in all German newspapers, but in major Allied newspapers as well. They kept track of these guys in the American, British, French newspapers. Bulke became the first German ace when he downed his 5th official victim on 16 October. And Immelmann followed with his 5th on the 26th of that month. When both men reached a total of 8 victories on 12 January 1916, they were granted unprecedented recognition by the Kaiser, who awarded them his highest decoration for bravery, the Orden pour le Mérite, later popularly known as the Blue Max. Not only were they its first aviator recipients, they were also among the earliest lowly second lieutenants to be granted an honor that had primarily been reserved for generals and royalty. When Bulka was transferred to another unit a little over a week later, his and Immelman's scoring duel continued nonetheless. Immelman added 5 to his count in March, 1 in April, and another in May. Bulka bagged 1 more in January, 4 in March, 1 in April, and 4 in May. They seemed virtually unstoppable, but the tide was, in fact, already turning. The Entente powers had introduced 2 new fighter scouts, the French Nieuport 11 and the British Airco DH-2 in early 1916, that by May had effectively countered the Eindecker threat. The Nieuport 11, derived from a pre-war racer design, was a highly maneuverable single-seat biplane powered by an 80 horsepower engine. A Lewis machine gun was mounted on its upper wing and fired over the tips of the propeller blades. Though this arrangement proved quite awkward when it came to reloading or fixing a gun jam in midair, the plane's lightness and agility made up for this shortcoming by outclassing the Eindecker's flight characteristics in almost every respect. The Airco DH-2, initially powered by a 100 horsepower and then a 110 horsepower engine, took advantage of its pusher design to mount a forward-firing machine gun on its nose. These 2 aircraft, in capable hands, did more than anything else to bring the Fokker Scourge to a close. An exclamation mark was added to this end when on 18 June, Max Immelmann was killed in combat. A German investigation determined that the interrupter mechanism on his E-3's machine gun had failed during an attack run, causing him to shoot away one of his propeller blades. And you can see the evidence of it here. The resulting imbalance tore his plane apart in midair, and Immelmann smashed to earth in its wingless, tailless fuselage. It was an ironic end for the man who owed so much to Fokker and his interrupter mechanism. German High Command, fearing that Oswald Bulka might meet the same fate, ordered him on an enforced leave to tour Turkey and the Balkans, while they tried to figure out what they could do to regain the upper hand. With that, the Fokker Scourge was well and truly over. So what was the Fokker Scourge's legacy to the German Air Service? The most important legacy was that it laid the groundwork for fighter aviation. After the Allies had begun in January 1916 to adopt formation flying in numbers as a defense against the Eindecker threat, the German Air Service responded by establishing small groups of Eindecker fighters called Fokker Staffeln to attack them in numbers. Such attacks were more or less haphazard in nature, however, with the pilots going off as they pleased after a target once the enemy was spotted. It was Oswald Bulka who eventually argued for coordinated team efforts where the fighters would act in concert and support one another in combat. All this eventually led to the establishment of the Air Service's first dedicated fighter units, the Jagdstaffeln, or Jastas for short, in late August 1916. Bulka's team tactics were implemented, and when he was asked to relate his basic principles for engagement, he wrote down the following, known as Bulka's Dicta, that remained valid and applicable up into the jet age. And as you can see, they are: try to secure advantages before attacking. If possible, keep the sun behind you. Once you've started an attack, always carry it through. Fire only at close range and only when the opponent is properly in your sights. Always keep your eye on your opponent and don't let yourself be deceived by ruses. Whenever you attack, it's important to go at your opponent from behind. If your opponent attacks you from above, don't try to evade him, but fly right at him. When you're over enemy territory, never forget your own line of retreat. For the Staffel, in principle, attack in a group of 4 or 6, but when the fight breaks down into individual combats, several shouldn't go after a single opponent. Remember that one. Another legacy of the Fokker Scourge was the experience and confidence gained by the Fokker pilots. By the end of May 1916, Bulka was Germany's premier ace with 18 victories. Immelmann followed with 15. 6 other aces came next. Hans Joachim Boudica with 7 victories, Ernst von Althaus, Wilhelm Frankl, and Hans Schuss, each with 6, and Rudolf Berthold and Kurt Winkens with 5. Among them were future aces such as Hans Baer, Gustav Leffers, Max Mulzer, the more famous Ernst Udet, and the infamous Hermann Göring. These men were called upon to meet the ever-increasing challenges the Germans faced, and did so with a great deal of success and sacrifice. I'd love to tell you about all of them, but there's no time here to do so. So instead, before closing, I'd like to at least conclude the stories of the Eindecker pilots I introduced to you earlier. First, there's Otto Parschau. You'll recall that when we left him in Douai in June 1915, teaching some of the pilots on the front there how to fly the E-1. On 28 July, he wrote Anthony Fokker, quote, "In the last weeks, heavy demands have been made on me. As of 16 July, I departed from Abteilung 62 and am now again at BAO in Gestels. I already had 3 combats in your 100 horsepower machine. Unfortunately, after a few shots, the gun jammed, enough to drive one crazy. The Parabellum gun is going to drive me to my grave. The 5 aircraft that were delivered to Douai with MG-08 have proven to be excellent. My students there have not experienced a gun jam up to now," unquote. Now, Parschau referred here to the LMG-08 machine gun, the lighter air-cooled version of a machine gun produced in Spandau, hence the popular, though technically incorrect name of Spandau machine gun. It was actually a Maxim. Anyways, a lot of people call it the Spandau. It indeed subsequently became the standard machine gun on German single-seat fighters. The 100 horsepower machine he was testing was the E2. Parschau's recommendations hastened its introduction at the front. In fact, Fokker tapped Parschau as the first man to try all his armed Eindecker variants in combat. We can see from this and other documents that he played a key role in the evaluation and advancement of the Fokker Eindecker by demonstrating its effectiveness to the military and his fellow airmen, both in the field and in written reports. Ironically, he nevertheless found himself somewhat left behind when it came to early air successes. For his luck, and possibly his unreliable Parabellum would have it, he was unable to achieve his first victory until the middle of October, by which time several other Eindecker airmen had already passed him by. Still, he began making up for lost time, and by 10 July 1916, the date of his Pour le Mérite award, he was tied for 6th place among Germany's highest scoring pilots, with 8 total victories to his credit. Parschau was a pioneer of another sort as well, because he was one of the first German aviators to shoot down an enemy observation balloon that same month. And this is an actual photo from that score. He was also finally given his own command on 14 July, a small independent group of Fokkers that foreshadowed the Jagdstaffel of late August. But just as his star had ascended, he was severely wounded in air combat on 21 July. He managed to land, but died 3 hours later in a hospital. It was a hard day for the members of his group because Werner Schramm, a pilot who had accompanied Parschau from his former unit, was also killed in combat later that evening. On 23 July, a long and elaborate military procession accompanied the 2 comrades as their remains were carried to a cemetery outside of Saint-Quentin. There, they were buried side by side, where they rest to this day. And you can't see, it's a little dark, but those are the letterings on the cross. Now, you'll recall that Kurt Winkens' victory of 1 July went unconfirmed, but just 2 weeks later, on 15 July, he was officially credited with the Morane Parasol, thus cementing his position as the first Eindecker pilot to be victorious in air-to-air combat. He was awarded another success on 12 August, about which he wrote, this is another quote, "It was a very interesting and exciting fight which ended with a little explosion of the French battle plane. The fellow almost took me with him when he went down in flames from 2,700 meters. For the last 50 rounds I fired at him were from a distance of only 2 airplane lengths. But I saved the situation via an involuntary looping." I'm curious as to what that was. "It really was wonderful. Due to my superior speed and maneuverability, I could continuously maintain my position in his machine gun's blind spot," unquote. Due to the comparative lack of aerial activity in the sector, the winter months, and a serious bout with the flu, Vinkins was unable to gain any more victories until the following May 1916. Then he proceeded to do so with a vengeance. He shot down 2 planes that month, followed by another 3 in June, giving him a total of 8 that won him the Port de Mérite on 1 July 1916, 1 year to the day after his first Eindecker victory had gone unconfirmed. 4 more enemy aircraft fell to his guns in July and early August before he was assigned to one of Germany's first Jagdstaffel fighter units. Within this new organizational structure and based in an area with intense aerial activity, Vinkins brought down no less than 6 aircraft within a span of 10 days in September, before his luck finally ran out. Fate, in the highly capable form of French ace Alfred Heurtaud of Spa 3, caught up to Vinkins on 25 September 1916 over Rubalcava. Heurtaud, who was flying the new SPAD 7 fighter that day, reportedly dived single-handed to attack a flight of 7 single-seaters flying in V formation. Choosing the leader, reckoning that he would be safest in the middle of the enemy formation, he fired only 5 rounds before his opponent fell. It was Kurt Vinkins. Vinkins' friend, Hans-Joachim Boudica, himself an early Eindecker ace that we saw earlier, elaborated further in a 29 September letter, quote, "Today, we must bury our good man Vinkins. He was surprised while flying a Fokker Eindecker E4. One of the main elevator spars was shot through and he crashed. Vinkins himself did not show any gunshot wounds." So surprisingly, though the newer Halberstadt and Albatros D-type fighters are now in use at the front, Vinkins had chosen to stay and die in a Fokker Eindecker. Now last but not least, we have Oswald Bulka. While on his enforced tour of the Balkans and Turkey, Bulka received word that he was to be placed in command of one of the new Jagdstaffel, Jasta II. He got the unit up and running in early September and set about training his men in the tactics he had devised during his days as an Eindecker pilot. He led by example, and within a span of just 55 days, he shot down 21 aircraft. That is more than 1 every 3 days. During that same period, his pilots accounted for another 30 successes, making Jasta II, with 51 confirmed victories, by far and away the best performing fighter unit in the German Air Service. Their nearest competitor, Jasta IV, with 5 Port de Mérite aces on its roster, achieved less than half of Jasta II's total with 24 victories. Bulka's accomplishments as a leader, teacher, and tactician were abundantly clear, and he was the world's ace of aces with 40 kills to his credit. But he wasn't immortal. On 28 October 1916, during a late afternoon combat, the right wheel of a squadron mate's landing gear collided with the tip of Bulka's left upper wing, causing a piece to break off. Bulka managed to wrestle the barely manageable plane down to the ground for an emergency landing. But then its wheels stuck in the muddy ground and violently flipped the plane on its back. Bulka's skull was fractured, killing him instantly. Ironically, he and his squadron mate had unwittingly violated the last rule of Bulka's dicta. They had gone after the same enemy plane and collided before they were aware of one another. So in summary, the Fokker scourge evolved from a confluence of events set in motion by a French pilot having placed steel wedges on his propeller blades. A Dutch aircraft designer responded with a simple improvement, the interrupter mechanism. Combined it with a recently developed light machine gun, and mounted both on a monoplane airframe that not only produced a speedier and faster climbing machine, but also provided its pilot with a solid gun platform that they themselves could aim at their victim. Then, a handful of men, Parschow, Bulka, Vinkins, Immelman, etc., led the way in making effective and deadly use of the weapon. Soon, they began to coordinate their efforts and discovered that teamwork could result in even greater efficacy. The examples these pioneers set and the experience they passed along led to the creation of the Jagdstaffel, thus giving birth not only to German fighter aviation, but to the team tactics eventually employed by fighter units on both sides of the conflict. And there was one other noteworthy legacy that Oswald Bulka left behind. One of the men he had tutored The man seen here who carried Boca's decorations on a black cushion during his funeral service was none other than Manfred Freiherr von Richthofen, known today as the Red Baron, who went on to become World War I's ace of aces with 80 victories, exactly twice the total of his mentor. The torch had been well and truly passed. Thank you.
Yes, I found that in reading popular accounts of the mechanism, you hear the term interrupter and then you hear the term synchronizer, and I think you use both. At least in my understanding, an interrupter prevents the gun from firing, whereas a synchronizer would actually fire the gun as the propeller rotated. So could you comment on similarities and differences between the two, both for Focke's mechanism and for the Allied mechanism? There was Vickers Challenger and then the Konstantinescu one.
Yeah, it actually was both. I mean, it operated on the principle of interrupting the trigger being able to fire the gun. So it was an interrupter in that sense. But it also synchronized the gun so that it would fire only at certain times. So that's why you have these interchangeable terms.
Sir, how many rounds would the Eindecker actually carry aloft? What was the maximum amount of ammo a pilot would have?
It varied. I don't recall exactly, but I think it was started out at 400 and then it was 800. They built up at some point to 800 with, of course, that was because it had two guns that carried 400. So, but it was, I think, 400 a gun. And they often expended quite a bit of ammunition. I mean, when you think of these targets, everybody's moving like this, and that's why Boca kept saying you just have to get up real close because the bullets are going like that, even though you're right behind the target. So sometimes they got lucky and hit a sweet spot right away, and other times they could blow through the whole thing and never cause any damage.
Any other questions? Yes, please.
Lance, in regard to the attitudes towards armament and aircraft, is it true that Vinkens, who was with Jagdstaffel 1 at the time, and which had gotten this mixed bag of old and new aircraft, Halberstadts, some leftover Fokkers, and an Albatros D1, which Boca managed to have one of his men commandeer for his more homogeneous Jasta 2.
Right.
Vinkens' choice of remaining with the E4, was that because he put more importance on having twin guns rather than the better performance of the Halberstadt, but which still had a single gun?
Yeah, I think, we don't know for sure, of course, but I think you've hit it on the head. That's why you had twice the firepower. He was used to that. And in fact, we now have, this is not very important to any of you, but there have long been pictures of a 3-gun Eindecker. And people always assume that it went to Immelman. They know it didn't go to Boca because we got a lot of letters from him, and no, it didn't go. Just found a photo of it in active field service with its serial number, and it was Kurt Vinkens. So he liked the idea of 3 guns. It didn't work out. They couldn't synchronize it.
And Belka didn't even like the E4 with 2 guns.
Yes, right. He did like the 2 guns, but he didn't like the machine because of the engine problems. He said it was just too unreliable.
Sir.
What was the difference between the Parabellum and the Spandau that made the Spandau more effective? Why?
I think it had to do with the breech mechanism, and it was more difficult to synchronize and interrupt that breech mechanism on the Parabellum. So they ran into constant problems, whereas the enclosed breech mechanism in the Maxim machine gun lent itself more closely to that kind of engineering.
Sir.
When did he introduce the tracers in the machine gun?
I really don't know. I do know that they used phosphorus ammunition in their attempts to shoot down balloons because they wanted to ignite them. So I don't know which came first. I don't believe it was used very often early on in terms of trying to aim, because it was already pointed out in a talk yesterday that no, that didn't work. So, but I truly don't know the answer to that.
Any other questions? Well, I have one. All the readings I have on airplanes and fighting and everything else, these guns seem to jam all the time. Why on air do they jam, but not so much on land? What was the reason for that?
Well, there were pilots on both sides that were really, really picky about loading their own ammunition belts. It's because they were hand-loaded. So the feed and the way the bullets were aligned and the belt itself, it was all wobbly. So if you didn't really make sure that the bullets were in there with the same kind of tension and the same orientation, that things could get crooked and jammed. So they jammed all the time.
All right, but
It wasn't, you know, a repeated process. There's too much variation in the loading of the belts.
yes, you have a question.
I also just want to comment on that too. I think part of the problem too was belts got cold, they stiffened, so they wouldn't feed right, and also dirt, excess oil, all those things combined, that when you get into air, temperatures change,
Yeah.
you have all these other issues, and they cause both Lewis guns and Vickers, I'm talking about Allied side, belt fed and drum fed, to have jams. And so what Lance is talking about is pilots who cared took a lot of time to work on their own ammunition loads because they felt that made a big difference. And they also, Allies carried many times both types of guns because they felt if one gun jammed, say like the drum fed, they felt the belt fed would still continue to work, which isn't necessarily true, but they believed that.
Right.
So,
Well, that was the rationale behind the SE-5A. But some pilots I knew said they were just fed up with that
Right.
Lewis gun.
Yeah.
Manic was saying of the SE-5A, why the hell don't they put in a twin gun range?
Yeah, thanks for that.
Yeah.
You're right. Yes, sir.
If you don't mind going back to that Parshall in the E4, there's a guy in the wing. Can you go back to that photo if you don't mind? And while he's doing that, excellent photos that you'll never see anywhere are in Lance's collections and in his publications, so keep that in mind. And the other, I want to make a real quick lunch announcement while we have a minute. Dick Bennett will be talking roughly at 12:30 to talk about the local Crossing chapter, so please stick around for that, and then also visit the vendors. But lunch is from, I'm not 12:30, I'm sorry. Lunch starts at 11:30, it goes to 12:30, so you'll be speaking at noon. Dick. Yeah, and what you'll notice too is that Lance gets the loop out and looks at every little detail here. What's on the cowling? Is there up on the top of the cowling?
Yeah. AF.
AF?
AF. Anthony Flocker.
Okay. And then the side little access door, just an access door
Which one?
on the cowling.
Well, that's actually a plate, an identification plate that had the serial number and all that stuff. The dark thing you're talking
What's the crewman doing?
It looks like he's securing the part of the cowling, you know, the rear cowling that goes over the machine guns. They were like little twist
Oh, because
bolts
they
and knobs.
loaded them, so they have it.
Yeah, so now he's loaded apparently.
And it's got a spinner.
It's battening down the hatches. Well, that's another rare thing. Yeah, every once in a while you see these little nose spinners, but they were not usually used in the field.
And a little generator on the left.
Yeah, was that a generator?
Yeah.
Okay.
And then I saw another one. Was there a compass out on the wing?
Yes.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Photos are the best things ever.
Yeah.